In 1579, a man from Mozambique arrived in Japan in chains. 3 years later, he had risen from the bottom of the social order to stand at the very top. This is the story of how an outsider forced an empire to bow to his presence. His name was Yasuke, and almost everything about his story defies explanation. To understand Yasuke, we first have to understand the world that made him. He was born sometime around 1555. The exact location is debated. Most historians point to Mozambique, though some suggest he may have been from what is now South Sudan, Ethiopia, or another region of East Africa. The honest answer is, we don't know for certain. What we do know is this: by the time he was a young man, the Portuguese Empire had turned the East African coast into one of the most heavily trafficked corridors of the global slave trade. Mozambique Island, Ilha de Moçambique, was a jewel in Portugal's colonial crown, a staging point, a way station between Europe, Africa, India, and beyond. Ships loaded and unloaded there constantly: spices, ivory, gold, and human beings. Yasuke was swept into that current. At some point, we don't know exactly when, he ended up in the service of Alessandro Valignano, an Italian Jesuit priest who was one of the most influential figures in the Catholic Church's eastward missionary expansion. Valignano wasn't just any priest. He was the visitor of missions in Asia, essentially the Church's chief ambassador to the Far East. And he was about to change the course of Yasuke's life. In 1579, Valignano boarded a ship bound for Japan. Yasuke went with him. When he arrived, dense, ancient cities, architecture unlike anything in Africa or Europe. And try to imagine what Yasuke looked like to them. When Valignano's party arrived in Kyoto in March of 1581, after spending time in other parts of Japan, word spread through the city like fire. According to records from the time, thousands of people poured into the streets trying to get a glimpse of the African man. They had never seen skin like his. They had never seen a man built like him. The records describe him as enormously tall, powerfully built, with what contemporaries called the strength of 10 men. Some in the crowd believed he must be painted, that his dark skin was somehow artificial, ink, soot, dye. Members of the crowd physically attempted to rub the paint off his skin. Yasuke endured it, and somewhere in that city, watching reports come in about the chaos this man was causing, simply by existing, was the warlord, Oda Nobunaga. If you're going to understand why Nobunaga was drawn to Yasuke, you have to understand who Nobunaga was. In the 1570s and early 1580s, Japan was emerging from over a century of the Sengoku period, the Warring States era, a brutal, fractured time, when regional warlords called daimyo fought each other endlessly for land, power, and survival. Nobunaga was on the verge of ending all of that. He was arguably the most powerful man in Japan. He was among the first Japanese commanders to deploy firearms, tanegashima, arquebuses, introduced by the Portuguese. But it wasn't just his military mind that set him apart. Nobunaga was fascinated by the foreign, by the new, by things that didn't fit the established order. He collected European curiosities. He wore Western-style clothing. He drank wine. So when he heard there was a man in his city who had caused a near riot just by walking down a street, a man described as towering, dark-skinned, impossibly strong, from a land beyond the edge of the world, Oda Nobunaga wanted to meet him immediately. The meeting happened. Valignano brought Yasuke before Nobunaga, And the same thing happened here, that happened in the streets. Nobunaga didn't believe what he was seeing. He too initially suspected that the dark skin was somehow painted on. He ordered Yasuke to remove his shirt, and then he ordered Yasuke to be scrubbed. His attendants rubbed Yasuke's skin repeatedly, trying to find the dye, the soot, the trick. There was nothing. What they were seeing was real. And in that moment, watching this powerful man endure the examination with patience and dignity, something shifted in Nobunaga. He was captivated, because Yasuke could communicate. He had spent years traveling with Valignano's missionary party. He had been exposed to Japanese language, Japanese customs, Japanese culture. He wasn't fluent yet, but he could speak. He could be understood. Nobunaga reportedly found this extraordinary. Here was a man from the furthest imaginable corner of the earth who had learned his language. The warlord was delighted. He invited Yasuke to stay, not just because of the novelty of Yasuke's appearance, but because of the man himself, his bearing, his composure, his size and apparent strength, and soon, by his intelligence. What happened next is where Yasuke's story moves from remarkable to almost unbelievable. Contemporary records tell us that Nobunaga would regularly summon Yasuke to dine with him. Just the two of them. That was extraordinary. In the strict hierarchy of feudal Japan, proximity to the lord was everything. It was carefully guarded, regulated, fought over by high-ranking retainers who had served Nobunaga for years. And here was this foreigner, this African man who had arrived less than 2 years earlier, eating with the warlord, privately. They would talk about Yasuke's homeland, about Africa, about the lands and peoples he had seen in his years of travel. Nobunaga was endlessly curious. Yasuke was, in a very real sense, Nobunaga's window onto a world the warlord could never visit. Nobunaga granted Yasuke a stipend. He gave him his own residence. He gave him a katana, a Japanese longsword. In the symbolism of feudal Japan, that gift cannot be overstated. The katana was not just a weapon, it was the soul of the samurai. It was status made physical. To receive a katana from Nobunaga was to receive recognition of your worth as a warrior and a person. And then came the title. But it went beyond conversation. By 1581, Yasuke held the rank of samurai, a black man from Mozambique, a man who had arrived in chains, a man who years earlier had been nobody, property, cargo, was now a samurai in the service of the most powerful warlord in Japan. This wasn't a ceremonial title. Yasuke fought. In 1582, Nobunaga was in the final stages of his campaign to unify Japan. He had crushed rival after rival. The end was almost in sight. And as he marched on his enemies, Yasuke marched with him. There are accounts of Yasuke carrying Nobunaga's weapons, a position of extreme trust, extreme closeness to the warlord. You don't hand your armaments to someone you don't trust with your life. He served at Nobunaga's side during the campaign against the Takeda clan, one of the most feared samurai clans in Japan. The Takeda were finally defeated and destroyed in early 1582. Yasuke was there. He was not a spectator. He was a participant, a warrior, a samurai. But history, especially the history of men who rise fast, can without warning. June 21st, 1582. Nobunaga was resting at Honnō-ji Temple in Kyoto with a small retinue. He was traveling light. He had no reason to fear. One of his most trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, turned. In the early hours of the morning, Mitsuhide surrounded the temple with an army of approximately 13,000 soldiers. Nobunaga and his small guard fought. It was hopeless. Surrounded, outnumbered, with no possibility of reinforcement. Nobunaga retreated into the temple's interior. There, according to historical accounts, he died, either killed in the fighting or by his own hand, through ritual suicide. The temple burned. Yasuke was not at Honnō-ji that night. He was with Nobunaga's son and heir, Oda Nobunaga, at Nijo Castle nearby. When word reached them of the betrayal, when they heard the sounds of battle and saw the glow of fire in the direction of the temple, Nobunaga prepared to fight and die. And Yasuke fought with him. The battle was brutal and brief. Nobunaga's forces were overwhelmed. Facing certain death, Nobunaga also committed ritual suicide. Yasuke was captured alive. He was brought before Akechi Mitsuhide, the man who had just destroyed everything. Mitsuhide looked at Yasuke and reportedly said that the black man was not Japanese, was not human in the way the Japanese were, and therefore could not be held responsible for the actions of a Japanese warrior. He was not to be executed. Instead, Mitsuhide sent Yasuke back to the Jesuit mission house in Kyoto. And after that day, Yasuke disappears from history. That's the hardest part of Yasuke's story to sit with. We know what happened up to that moment, and then, nothing. No records, no accounts, no mention of him in any document we found. Did he return to Africa? Did he remain in Japan? Did he die young, or live to old age? Did he ever find peace? We don't know. The historical record simply closes the door. Some researchers believe he may have stayed in Japan in some capacity, perhaps serving other lords, perhaps living quietly. There's a theory, largely speculative, that he may have become a mercenary or a trader. Others believe he eventually made his way back across the ocean, returning to the world he came from, forever changed by a decade that would have seemed impossible to anyone who had known him as a young man. We have to hold the uncertainty. That's part of being honest about history. What we cannot do is pretend the uncertainty makes the story less real.